very great pleasure today to welcome Dr. Sylvea Hollis to the Peel and to this final talk in Baltimore National Heritage Area's annual lecture series, It's More Than History. Dr. Hollis is a National Park Service, National Park Foundation, Mellon Humanities Fellow. Her talk has generated an enormous amount of excitement on social media. She has a huge number of fans out there. So with no further ado, then I'm going to hand the mic to Sylvea, and thank you very much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nancy. Can you hear me all right before I go too far?
Yes, I can hear you fine.
Excellent. So I am excited today to have this presentation as an opportunity to discuss creating a usable path for women's suffrage. I currently wanted to pause, Nancy, because I don't see the slides.
I'm just about to start them. If you're ready, I'll get them going now.
Yes.
All right. Can you see those?
I cannot.
Oh, yeah, that's right, because I started them before I shared my screen. Give me 1 second.
Sure.
Okay. And there we go. And actually, that reminds me to just give one last note that I skipped over earlier. If you are joining us through Microsoft Teams in the app, you should be able to turn on live captioning if you want to get a complete text transcription of everything that is said. We are also streaming captioning via the PowerPoint. So hopefully that's helpful to everyone. So take it away, Sylvea.
Excellent. I'm ready for the next slide.
All right.
I wanted to first start by saying thank you to the countless people that were involved in helping to bring this invite to fruition. First off, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the support and funding of the National Park Foundation. I'll speak a little bit later about what this NPS Mellon fellowship is and what the responsibilities of and my roles have been. But I'm thankful to them, as well as the National Park Service, the DC office. And this invitation came about out of a larger program that was hosted by the first region 1. And so I'm grateful to them, as well as, of course, the Mellon Foundation. Thank you to Nancy and Heather and David at the Peel Center, as well as the Baltimore National Heritage Area. Shantae Daniels has been a remarkable aid and support in being able to provide space for me to have larger conversations about the 19th within the field. So I'm thankful to her, as well as Megan McSwain. And lastly, a really thoughtful and helpful person in the process has been Ida Jones as well. Next slide. I thought it might be useful and helpful to provide a general overview of where I plan to take us today. First being an introduction to the NPS Mellon program. Secondly, a discussion of the 19th centennial work broadly in terms of what my roles and responsibilities have been. Next, discussion of how historiography, or the history of the 19th Amendment, has been critical to helping me think about this project, as well as the academic grounding that has centered the conversations around the centennial and around the 19th commemoration. And this is my first time sharing a kind of a formula that I've created to help me think about what a usable path could be for the 19th, as well as I'll provide an example of a case study that walks through that kind of a usable path formula. And lastly, I'll conclude. Next slide, please. So first, it might be helpful to share that the National Park Service and the National Park Foundation entered into a relationship with the Mellon Foundation in 2017, and they did at least a year-long search for finding 3 humanities fellows. The areas of interest were gender and sexuality, labor and productivity, and the legacy of the civil rights movement. And I applied, and in the fall of 2018, I successfully entered as the Gender and Sexuality Scholar. 2 charters came with that work, one being helping to memorialize the story of the 50th anniversary of Stonewall, The second being helping to think about scholarship that's central and really important to conversations around the centennial of the 19th Amendment. My background has tended to be the histories of the long 19th. My dissertation research was a social and cultural study of African-American community in my hometown of Birmingham, Alabama, and the way that they developed a fraternal network that was a alternative system of governance that really created their own versions of insurance and protection in religious ceremonies for burial practices. So I say that to say, women's history, of course, had been essential and really important to the work that I did, but the story of the 19th Amendment was one that I knew passively. It was something that I was familiar with, of course, the 19th Amendment being something that was significant to women's history, but understanding ways to think about this within collaboration of scholars and people on the front end and that work with visitors was a new challenge and an extremely exciting opportunity. So where did I start? Of course, first I started with the amendment itself. And in my reading of the amendment, I want to share that my initial thinking was literal. So it says, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged the United States by any state on account of sex. And so I started thinking about, what did that mean in that particular moment? What did it mean before that? And I want to say that something that's been really critical and deeply helpful for me in the process of developing my ideas around these larger conversations of the centennial has been leaning on scholarship that existed before I came into this position. In particular, I went to a talk with the National Gallery, the Portrait Gallery, and I saw Dr. Lisa Tetreault do a talk around this actual amendment, and something that I had never thought about before was how passive the right to vote was granted to women. It does not say literally, the United States shall give women the right to vote unequivocally. It says United States, the vote shall not be denied. And so thinking about that kind of a passive language as opposed to something that provided a kind of unequivocal security, I think is a really important interrogation place to launch. Next, please. So literally at the end of my first year of my postdoc, a really important article was published in by the New York Times. And if you follow the story of the centennial, I'm sure you're familiar with it. Brent Staples, who works for the New York Times, wrote an article called "How Suffrage Movement Portrayed Black Women," and out of the conversations that he ignited, I was intrigued by the pushback on his thesis. I was intrigued by the types of conversations that emerged that were around the topic, but that did not go central to his thesis. And in particular, I would encourage you all, if you're not familiar, to read it. I was most intrigued by the fact that a lot of the scholarship that he quoted had been around for at least 10, some texts, 20 years. And yet the way that the conversation around the centennial in certain social media spaces and other places existed, it was more of a defensive stance than what I would consider a productive, how do we use this story? How do we use this perspective? How do we use this conversation as a site of civic engagement and teaching, and as a site of civic engagement with interpretation around what the responsibilities of voting were, what the cultural politics that define who could be advocated for and who was considered less significant in the movement, who those actors were, what that process looked like, the strategy around creating conversations for women's access to vote was really significant, and I think a part of the central tenet of why this work was so important. And so, with that being said, I saw this as an opportunity to lean into the scholarship, and it would be helpful if I could see the next slide. So early on in my research, I came across this woman's work. Her name is Dr. Rosalind Herbert Penn, And she wrote a text that was published in 1998, but it had been a part of her dissertation project that was completed in the late 1970s. And Dr. Rosalind Turberg Penn was a professor. She'd studied at Howard University, but she was a professor at Morgan State University in Baltimore. And considerably significant about this woman's work is that at the time when she started doing her dissertation research in the 70s, much of the body of scholarship that existed around the 19th argued that African American women had not been as interested in stories of suffrage, or if they had been interested in the suffrage movement, it was on the lens of anti-suffrage, that network of people that were against larger conversations about women's voting. And she literally expanded the way that people thought about African American women's political conversations, their access, their networks, and the way that they organized. And she went into the histories of women's suffrage, those that had been written earlier by the likes of Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and found within those various editions African American women and their critical ways in which they had been involved in this larger movement. She wrote those stories. She told this type of a state-by-state narrative, actually excavated and found women that had, African American women who had voted before the passage of the 19th, and what those places look like and what they advocated for. And I really like this collage of images, in part because it shows her not as the person who wrote that book that I'm talking about, or wrote the dissertation that I'm talking about, but her as a public scholar. In the course of doing this work of thinking about what is the usable past of the 19th, where the public places that conversations about the 19th have existed, anniversary after anniversary, Dr. Rosalind Turberg Penn showed up, and there's hours of video footage of her on C-SPAN engaging in panels, public conversations, open dialogues, and sometimes just general lectures around this research. And so unfortunately, she passed away in December of 2018, but I know that if she had not passed away, a critical part of her continued scholarship would have been helping to remind people the value of African American women's activism and scholarship, and as well as the particular role in the suffrage movement. Next slide, please. The work that Dr. Turberg Penn created was not built on nothing. She came in conversation with and was mentored by a significant scholar who also was a part of the Baltimore community, Dr. Benjamin A. Quarles, professor at Morgan State University, wrote a series of articles around male suffrage, the quest for male suffrage, and advocates who were involved in the suffrage movement, people like Frederick Douglass. Much of the scholarship that we understand about Frederick Douglass and his activism within the suffrage movement came from Dr. Quarles, and Dr. Quarles was deeply supportive of Dr. Penn's research at a time when scholars of women's history were not as supportive, and scholars of African American history were not as supportive. And he created a critical, thoughtful, endearing space for her to do her work while working as a full-time parent and also a teacher and a student. And so the work that he created was bedrock of her scholarship in many ways. And I also wanted to acknowledge the fact that this larger conversation around the 19th, the things that people discussed broadly under Brent Staples' article, also had significant scholarship in the form of Dr. Carter G. Woodson in his journal Negro History, publishing articles like the work of Dr. Quarles in the early 19th century around this topic, as well as Dr. Du Bois's Crisis magazine, the article series of the NAACP, continuously following these conversations around the suffrage movement. Next slide, please. And lastly, I want to, well, lastly, within this phase of the discussion, I want to say that the city of Baltimore, I was really excited about coming to the Peale Center in particular, but I think virtually this is an even more unique way to have this conversation. But the city of Baltimore, its higher education institutions, they've been an important part of the legacy for the protection of knowledge around the 19th Amendment. I have been in conversation with and deeply appreciate the work of Dr. Martha Jones. And this quote I thought was really interesting: the story of African-American women in the vote overturns basic assumptions about the history of American political culture and women's suffrage. And this was published in 2019. And it's been a framework for the way that I think about the 19th. And I want to encourage you, for the people that are on here that are from Baltimore, the names that I've elevated, I really want to encourage you to go back and look at the work that exists in the city, and why I'm arguing that Baltimore is such has been a significant place for thinking about the way that the scholarship around this 19th has been developed. Next slide, please. So searching for a usable path. And I want to admit that if we had been in a smaller, more intimate setting, I think it would be easier for me to walk around and say, you know, I think I found a usable path. But it's something about the scale. I'm very excited to see the potential for this to be a larger conversation. But I almost now want to suggest that it's a question mark rather than a period or exclamation point at the end. I like to think that I have found a usable path, and I would love to, at the end of this presentation, hear from you all about the utility of this. But when we think about contemporary relevance of memorialization, I have found that the thing that has grounded this work the most for me is three things: personal history, local history, and scholarship. Those things sitting at the intersection have created a really important way for me to think about this particular story, as well as other types of memorializations. On the right, there's an image of myself and my two favorite women, and they are the late Tenny Lou Hollis and the late Emma Mae Guest. These are my grandmothers. And when I think about the personal ways that my life connects with the 19th Amendment, one being the woman that you see on the right was my grandmother. She's my father's mother, and she worked for virtually her whole life as a domestic. And as such, I did not know, to be honest, what all of that meant until much later on, and getting into the body of scholarship around African-American women domestics. Beyond, I say that to say I knew that she cleaned houses, took care of people's kids, you know, cooked, that kind of thing. I didn't understand the larger implications for what that meant till much, much later. And yet around the time that I was learning this larger body of scholarship on Black women domestics, I found, after my grandmother passed, in her chest, a series of poll tax receipts. And poll tax receipts that dated back to the 1930s and 1940s, 1950s. And it was really interesting and intriguing for me to think about this African-American woman in Birmingham, Alabama, somehow registering to vote, and also somehow gaining the right to vote, and using and staying abreast on her poll tax receipts, and going into the various polling stations and actualizing that right. So that is one form of my personal history with this 19th Amendment. And on the left, my other grandmother could not vote, did not have political access to vote until after the Voting Rights Act of 65. And what I came to understand of her was my deepest, earliest memories of her during the election periods, working as a poll watcher, going to greet people when they came in to vote, helping them understand how to vote, doing trainings for other poll watchers around the ethics of care and ways to create an environment that was neutral and safe. And also, so I say that to say that first became a way for me to think about these public conversations around the 19th. The second being this local history narrative. When I look and think about the way that the place that I'm from shaped conversations around voting and access, it's really hard for me not to think about this particular building that we have currently still that stands, the Jefferson County Courthouse building. Now, suffice to say that this structure was completed in 1932, so it doesn't explicitly fit within this particular moment of when the 19th was passed. The earlier courthouse building was torn down. But I would like to think about, from my grandparents' perspectives, these two my grandmother's perspectives, what it was like, the one on the right, to show up to the courthouse, to register to vote, and or to continue to conduct civic business. Something really important about this structure that recently has been written about within the past 10 years is that there's two murals in the entranceway. You cannot miss massive murals that go literally almost from the floor all the way to the ceiling. On the right, it's there's a topic called Visions of the Old. On the left, there's Visions of the Old South. On the right, there's Visions of the New South. And the interesting thing is, on the left, the Visions of the Old South is an image of a Southern belle, very tall Southern belle. And on the right, it's visions of a new modern woman, new modern man. And of course, both of these larger depictions of images are depicting a type of leadership, power that centered whiteness. And the bottom parts of both of these murals I've shown on the right. One shows enslaved people picking cotton, and the other one on the right shows the lowest station of labor was African-American men in the coal mines in the city, one of which my grandmother, the one that did not work outside of the home, but absolutely worked inside the home, her husband was a coal miner. And so the whole larger idea of this image within a courthouse, within a civic space, said a considerable lot about people's the ideal visions, the city's future visions of where African-American citizens were intended to stay. And it also became a really important message to people who came into the courthouse to conduct civic business. So I share personal history plus local history plus scholarship, that being a type of potential formula for a usable past. Now, what comes out of that, alongside this contemporary moment, is understanding that the 19th Amendment is a turning point. But, and I think I really want to stress that in a moment that a lot of times the kind of passive literature argues that the 19th Amendment was the beginning of women's right to vote, or it was the end of women's denial of being, giving a right to vote. It literally is a middle, because we still are in the struggle of voting rights and voting access. And I say that because a continuous and really important local story for me was a story, and also that has national implications, is the story of Shelby v. Holder. Shelby County is a county I went to college in that county, and that county is the place that the Voting Rights Act of '65 was overturned, meaning that oversight and responsibility of governance at the federal level was no longer a priority in terms of voting rights and access. And so in an era where we are in the shadows of memorializing and remembering a really significant event, I think the usable path is leaning into the continued quest for voting equality. And so that's where this usable path could be. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So we'll launch into this larger case study. I, in my dissertation research, shared that a part of the project that I worked on was on African-American communities creating their own sense of essentially a social welfare program. And a central figure that I had hoped to make my entire dissertation on, but the records weren't extant enough, was this woman by the name of Carrie Tuggle. So my dissertation did not write Carrie Tuggle through the lens into this narrative of the 19th. It was something that I knew a little bit about, but did not know at the particular moment how to engage with it. But coming into this National Park Service fellowship gave me an opportunity to really spend some time thinking about her central role and importance within the larger 19th story. So this is an image on the right of a headline from a newspaper article about Carrie Tuggle's death. So it says, of course, a prominent educator is claimed by death, found in an orphanage with $2.50. And so who was Carrie Tuggle, and why, and how does this fit within this larger story? I'm sure perhaps is a question that you're asking. This woman became a really important figure who created an orphanage in the city. And she did so because at the time that she founded this at the time, African-American children were essentially being caught up within the larger same system that put vagrants or people that were considered to be standing idle within street chain gangs and or the mines. So African-American children in the city did not have access to the same type of social resources, social welfare resources that white children did. And so there was no systems of larger municipal support for them. And so Carrie Tuggle sought to create that at a private level. And so that's the story people know of her. That is how people most commonly understand her, for the creation of the orphanage. But what she also did was, in her quest to advocate on behalf of African-American children, she developed some really savvy relationships with city leaders. And as such, it's significant that she's noted as being the first African-American woman in the county to register to vote. And she did that in November of 1920. And so revisiting her story and thinking about that within this larger arc of the centennial, I think has been really important. And so that's a part of this case study. Next slide, please. So my quest to revisit her story and think about the 19th, I centered 3 questions. What is the work that's being done when we frame Carrie Tuggle's progressive activism through the story of suffrage? Secondly, in what ways does Tuggle fit within the historiography that we have come to understand in the suffrage movement? And then lastly, why do these distinctions matter? Next slide, please. So Tuggle, Carrie A. Griggs Tuggle, was born in Eufaula, Alabama, and you see a little arrow that points directly to where it is. You can see it's on literally on the line, the border of Alabama and Georgia. She was born there May 18th, 1858, to Warren and Charity Griggs. She was born enslaved, and she was the oldest of 4 children with 1 brother and 2 sisters. Her early life was shaped by Reconstruction's violent end and Jim Crow's gradual codification. Next slide, please. On November the 3rd, 1874, when she was 16 years old, deadly riots occurred in Eufaula during a statewide election. Her father, Warren, had been an active voter since at least the year of 1867, when he registered to vote in Barber County, Alabama. She was 9 years old at the time. Next slide, please. I think one of the more interesting things that I discovered about her early years is that shortly after the riot, by the time that she was a teenager, she moved to Montgomery, Alabama in 1865. And this image is of, it's a fountain in Montgomery. It's on Commercial Street or Commerce Street. And if you think about this image in 1879, which is literally about 4 years after she moved there, she would have walked this street. She would have emerged, been a part of this community, literally in the shadows of emancipation, literally in the shadows of the first generation of living as a free person in a city that had played a really pivotal role in the Civil War. Montgomery was the first capital of the Confederacy. And of course, obviously, in this time period, the city was redeeming itself or rebuilding a larger structure of Jim Crow society that they wanted to have model as much of enslavement before as possible. So she's in this capital city, escaping the violence of Eufaula, and the finding and building networks in spite of this really difficult moment. I also provide this image, obviously, I think, because Commerce Street is one of the more visual representations of the legacies of slavery in Montgomery. Commerce Street was literally the slave auction streets in the city. And this fountain area was where the larger auctions took place. And so thinking about this woman's intersection between being born enslaved and navigating life beyond enslavement on behalf of herself and her family in this new place is a particularly fascinating concept, especially in light of us knowing later on what she becomes. So she marries her husband, John, in Montgomery, and they settled there in 1875. And while she's there, people come to know her as this remarkable seamstress, as this remarkable cook, and she works for some of the most prominent city leaders, including, created clothing for governors and state representatives, and had really endeared herself to the community in a way that was politically savvy on her perspective, but perhaps from the perspective of those who had her labor, there were other types of intentions. And yet I say this to say, she found a way to create a whole system of resources for children in need in larger structure. Next slide, please. So she moves to Birmingham area, out in the outskirts of Birmingham, with her husband and her family around 1883. And they settle in a community called Eamon Ridge, which is still around in a historic Black community. And this is around the time that she motivates herself to really take a more conscious look at the issue of convict leasing and the problems that's happening on the streets with children being arrested alongside men and women, boys and girls being arrested alongside men and women. Next slide, please. So this is an image of Tuggle Institute, which she later founded in 1903. And I'm intrigued by this image in part because it shows this institution, this community, this network that she literally built from the ground out of a passion around protecting children. So the story of the Institute in its whole, you may have seen and remember from the obituary image, the story of, she started it with $2.50. The story is Carrie Tuggle was chosen by the AME Church to go and sit in court and to sit in court cases and advocate on behalf of African-American children who were being arrested for vagrancy and things and such. So in a series of her exchanges between herself and a judge, the judge had ordered these two young men to be forced to work on the streets in the chain gang. She stepped up, said, is there anything I can do to save them? The judge said, well, if you're willing to pay for them, then I will give them to you, because this is how the system worked. It was built on a system of paying for labor. So she paid $2.50 and was given the children. And those two children became her first charges in the orphanage. And the project itself initially developed in saving children that were literally on the street and had little places to go. So we're not outright orphanages, but the term orphan and the turn of the 20th century was more of only having one parent, or so it didn't necessarily mean that these children had no place to go, but it did mean that if your mother is working as a domestic during the daytime, or if she's a live-in person, you may be left to take care of yourself. And so the system that she created became a safe place for children, particularly children whose parents were domestics or also worked in the mines during the day, to stay and be taken care of, while also receiving a really significant education. Next slide, please. During a time period when a lot of these institutions, these types of industrial institutions, privileged and thought about training people to do domestic labor and agricultural labor, which Tuggle did as well, she also found very deep value in educating children to read, research, develop their own questions. And so it became learning music. It became a really expansive institution. And she garnered a lot of support from the judges that had initially not been that kind to her. when she was going to advocate on behalf of these children. One judge in particular was Hugo Black, who later on became judge on the Supreme Court. And he's known, of course, being a part of the Brown versus Board of Education system. Hugo Black was actually a board member for this school and this institution. And I think about this, I think about her political savvy, because many of these things lend itself to being the answer to the question of how, why, in what way was Tuggle chosen to be the first person to register to vote, the first African-American woman to register to vote in county. Next slide, please. So this is an image of the first school that they built, and it was a model for ways of thinking about orphanages in the state. And she was revered throughout the South for her ability to fundraise and develop networks of support to provide spaces for young children in the city. Tragically, in the summer of 1919, though, a time of really significant racial violence, the school was burned to the ground, and no one knew what happened or how the fire started, but it likely was a part of this larger Red Scare of 1919. And whereas before the school had been a really important network of Black self-help and advocacy and political organizing amongst African Americans, Tuggle expanded her financial network at a time that was critically important so that she could have another institution, so that she could have that school rebuilt from the ground. Next slide, please. So part of the main institutions that had helped to found and fund and support the original organization was this network of fraternal members called the Colored Knights of Pythias. The Colored Knights of Pythias is a Black fraternal group that was founded originally in Vicksburg, Mississippi in 1880. First Birmingham chapter was founded in 1883, literally the year that the Tuggles first moved to the city, and her husband was deeply involved in strategizing and organizing within this organization. Tuggle was very passionate about being involved in the women's auxiliary of the organization, and which was called the Court of Calanth. Some regional people call it the Court of Calanthi. And they raised a considerable amount of money to support welfare causes like the Tuggle Institution. And yet, like I said, when the Red Summer happened, a lot of that changed. And so they expanded, this network of prominent African Americans expanded their reach and went to the city and asked city leaders, those judges, of the wives of judges that had been for a long time touting and proud of Tuggle's work for her ability to help support children in the way that they had been supporting white children. They found fundraising support that sustained them. And so really that happening around 1919 became a way that Tuggle's name, her work, her passion became understood around the time that women gained the right to vote. Next slide, please. So I think it's important that as we historicize where these conversations come from, we also think about what the legacies of them have been. So one of the many children that Tuggle raised, protected, took care of was a man by the name of Arthur George Gaston. In the state, in the state of Alabama, he's prominently known as one of the first Black millionaires in the state. He literally followed her roadmap and developed a system for making a lot of money because he invested in systems that he invested in this larger system of desegregated businesses. So he said, find a need and fill it. So all of these structures existed that had not provided aid or resources or respectful consumer culture for African Americans. So he developed a funeral home, a contracting company, a nursing home, so all of these businesses. And so in 1979, he was able to see Carrie Tuggle placed in the Women's Hall of Fame for the state and had a memorial monument placed in Kelly Ingram Park in her honor, which I find intriguing because to date, it appears to be one of the earlier monuments to African Americans in the city, and it's literally in the middle of one of the more prominent places that tell the story of the modern civil rights movement in the state. And so she became an early marker that was historicized within this larger narrative. But lost relatively was the story of her being that first woman to register to vote and what the implications were of that. Next slide, please. Her greatest legacy, I would argue, though, is not the institutions that she built. It's not the monument that still stands to tell her story. It's her graduates. It's these alum that have gone on to do remarkable things. And I'm really intrigued by thinking about the network of people that she helped to build a whole new world for, and what the implications have been within the larger African American social, cultural, political space. Next slide, please. So one of the things I'm really excited about, the end of this year, the National Park Foundation provided a grant to the National Monument, and we're working on creating a one-woman stage play that tells the story of Carrie Tuggle, and also that centers how she became this first African American woman to register to vote in the state, in the county, excuse me. And so the production itself will be for the young students at Carrie Tuggle Elementary, but also will have an opportunity to have a more expansive audience. But in this time of COVID, we are figuring out if it needs to shift to virtual, or if we need to shift it to a time period where we can continue to just make sure that everyone's safe. Deeply excited about it. These three images are the three images of Tuggle's school. The first one being the one that, as I said, was razed. The one in the middle was torn down, so this new, more expansive institution could take its place. But very much looking forward to returning to the city and helping to be a part of telling that story and thinking about a usable path. Next slide. In conclusion, searching for a usable path means thinking about the contemporary relevance of memorialization. The 19th Amendment was an important turning point, but it was not a beginning and it was not an end. There remains great potential for thinking about causes that motivated women to vote versus the right to vote itself, but centering the causes versus the right, I think, is really important. And lastly, Baltimore has an important legacy of writers who have inspired us to think about the larger question of the vote for what. I want to say thank you again for this opportunity. I welcome any questions and or thoughts or feedback, and hope that we can have as close to an open dialogue via this medium as possible.
All right, thank you so much, Sylvia. Wonderful, wonderful talk. We've heard the phrase making the personal political and vice versa. You've really shown us that it's two sides of the same coin. And if you can bring those two together, you really do have a very powerful path to using history to empower the present and the future. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to stop sharing your PowerPoint now and give the screen back to you. And we're also going to see if Shante Daniels, the executive director of the Baltimore National Heritage Area, is able to pop in here and say a few words as we conclude the It's More Than History lecture series. So just give us 1 second and see if Shante is able to unmute herself and turn on her camera. Hey, there she comes. All right. Hi, Shante.
Hi, how is everyone?
Great to see you.
I just want to say, I want to thank Doc Sylvia. She knows she didn't like that, but I like to call her Dr. Sylvia. She earned it. And of course, Doc Nancy. But thank you all for participating in these virtual lectures. We originally called these lectures It's More Than History. That name wasn't intentional. We are a people of heritage, culture, and place. And I wanted to capture that in the name. So I think that all of our stories are collective and they're more than history. But there's one thing, Nancy alluded to it just in her introduction of me, and Sylvia's work is proof of it. One of the things I fell in love with when I first came to Baltimore, because I didn't know that, is the Sankofa bird that was on the Living Classrooms building. And so I just wondered a lot about that bird and why did they use that and what did that mean? So I did a little research, a little Wikipedia research. But the one thing that I was able to take from that is that we go back to the past and we bring forward that which is useful. And I think that that's directly in line with Sylvea's work. The past is not so pleasant for us people sometimes, but we definitely need to learn from it. And we take that, and as people of color, we always hear the stories of our grandparents and our parents, and we don't always listen to what they're saying, but one day there are some gems of real importance there. And so we have to find those things that they tell us and the things that are in our history that are useful so that we can go forward and work together collectively and make a better life for our young people and for ourselves. So I appreciate everybody's participation in these programs, and I hope that we will continue to work with the PIL. And of course, Doc Sylvea, you are always welcome to come back.
It was a pleasure.
And I thank everybody for all the hard work. And I don't want to forget the behind the scenes person. She's out there. Heather Shelton, thank you for everything. So everyone have a great weekend, and thank you so much. So I'll mute myself now. I could talk to you guys all day long. I'm dying for some.
Well, stay on. We've got a few more minutes for questions and answers. So we'll be relaying those questions and comments that are made in text on our website or on our Facebook page. My colleagues Heather and David London will be voicing those if they've been typed in. You're very welcome if you're joining us via Teams here to unmute yourself at this point and ask a question by voice, or just type it into the chat panel and we'll be happy to relay it to Dr. Sylvea. I actually had a question, Sylvea. I feel a little shy about it. But I was just wondering if the Tuggle Institute was only open to children of African American descent, like if that were kind of codified and stated explicitly, or if actually children of, all sorts of different racial backgrounds, for lack of a better word, could go there.
Well, it wasn't explicitly stated, but the city itself had a place for white children, and so there wasn't a need, to be honest. Like there was some records, the Children's Bureau, which was established here in DC. A lot of the earlier activism around the Children's Bureau came out of the Deep South, and the first executive director is actually from Birmingham. Mm-hmm. And so I say that to say the city had a very strong system of taking care of white children, and so Tuggle's Institute wasn't needed by that community. And yet I want to acknowledge the funny thing about these kinds of rigid rules like segregation is that many things often happen beyond the archive. And so I won't say that it didn't happen. I'll say I haven't seen any historical record of it.
Interesting. Looks like we've got a comment here, a question from Chad, who's joining us from the Maryland State Arts Council, the Maryland Traditions Group. And he says, if more historians move towards a human-centric approach to history research, how might that ripple outward through society?
I think that's a dynamic rhetorical question. I mean, I could talk about that. I think, first off, I want to say the work that has inspired me the most are the scholars that do that. So, I mean, I promise, if you were to go on the C-SPAN and just type in Dr. Turberg Penn and just listen, like that was built into her methodology. And I won't say that I don't know which, though. They're not all scholars do that, but the best ones, the ones that inspire me to be a historian, do that and do that really well. I think it's extremely important to create work and make sure that the work is accessible to the broader public. And that, I think, also is a part of having a human-centered approach, like creating work that can be interpreted, understood, and used for folks in their everyday life.
Mm-hmm. We've also got a question from Heather. I don't know, Heather, do you want to voice that yourself?
Yeah, so Dr. Sylvea, I'm just curious if you have any other stories, historical stories that might help inspire people to vote in 2020.
Well, not to lean too much on the personal, but I love the personal, if you all noticed. And I think the thing that has inspired me the most is my parents taking me, and I imagine many other people can relate to this, being a young person, going to vote early in the morning or whenever your parents took you. And the most exciting thing was getting that little sticker, and it was a ritual. I mean, and because I knew we were going, I actually eventually cared what they were going to do. I mean, like, what were the issues that they were voting for? Initially it was just, let me get the sticker. But eventually it became, oh wait, which election is this? Is this a gubernatorial? Is this a national? Is this, and then, oh, we're voting on an amendment. Alabama, I don't know if people outside of the state know this, but the state of Alabama has the longest state constitution in the country. And it's literally the same 1901 constitution that was the segregationist constitution. And so there's there's no home rule. So people vote on everything. There's all kinds of amendments coming up. And so you learn that by continuing to ask questions like, oh, what is the amendment for this time? So that's what fuels me. That kind of just, not living in my parents' house or being raised by them in the same way anymore, but just doing it because I know they did it, and doing it also because I know that folks that came before me couldn't do it as easily.
Dr. Sylvea, there's a very nice sticker that's just been posted into the chat panel in Teams here by Paige Barnum. And she comments, in New York State last year, this was a very exciting I voted sticker to receive. I don't know if you can see that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recognize the figure in there?
I do not. I don't know.
Check that out.
Yeah.
Paige, if you'd like to comment or add anything, feel free to unmute yourself and speak, or you can obviously type into the text, the chat panel as well.
I unfortunately, I will say, I wish I could remember the name of the woman, though, but I was doing research last year on the New York State elections, and they were a part of this group of African-American women, especially out of Harlem, who helped to elect some of the earliest Black elected officials, like state representatives, into Albany, and I can't remember the name of the woman who she was literally the wife of the man who campaigned. But New York has some really great work, in the State Museum out of Albany did an amazing exhibition that looked at the story of the Centennial, but also the New York State's particular story. And of course, it's the site of Seneca Falls, which is really significant. And if you haven't read Lisa Tetrault's book, The Myth of Seneca Falls, it is a really remarkable way to think about history and history making. So I encourage you all to consider that as well.
I'm so glad you brought up Lisa Tetrault. I know you mentioned her in your talk, and I think she was participating. She was one of your listeners earlier. Either that, or there's two people with the same name, but it's an unusual last name. So I think she's left now, but okay. It was great to see her name pop up and
that's great.
to cite her work. Strikes me that maybe the next talk we need to have you back to give is precisely this one about how, having gotten the vote, women mobilized to get women elected.
Yes.
And to change the political scenery, which is obviously something we really need to be doing this year.
Very important work. Yes.
Oh, great. Casey Roan has joined us. She gave the last talk, very well attended, very popular talk on women's suffrage history. And Casey, feel free to unmute yourself if you want to voice this, or I can read out your chat comment here.
Hey, I can unmute myself. Hey, Dr. Hollis.
Hi.
So my question, I think I've gotten this feedback before, is that as historians, we don't want to read too much into people's motivations without some sort of hard evidence to back that up. And
Yes.
I find that to be challenging because I think, you know, there's a wish to interpret people's circumstances and actions and extrapolate what they might have been thinking and feeling from that, that motivated them to take these steps that they did. And I was just curious if you could share your thoughts on to what degree we're able to do that. It seems like you did some of that with your research into Ms. Tuggle, and how do we reconcile that with our need to understand people's motivations?
That's a great question. I think the thing that's helped me the most for Tuggle, or even this larger conversation that was ignited around Brent Staples' work, has been sources. So for Tuggle herself, like I said, so she had a newspaper. It wasn't that extent, the records that were preserved, but her students speak a lot for her. And she nurtured them. She taught them. So her newspaper has a lot of what she was thinking. I was one of the first, I was the first Black woman to vote in the county because XYZ. No, that's not explicitly stated. But what has been stated in these kind of oral history interviews, like A.G. Gaston did an oral history interview. There's another Erskine Hawkins is a jazz performer that went through her school. There's an oral history interview that he did. I have the records of when she was nominated to the Alabama Hall of Fame, Women's Hall of Fame, and like the letters that people wrote about her. And through those texts, you see her political savvy because her students saw it, because she gave it to them. And so through those texts, you can see her literally straddling this system of Jim Crow and trying to figure out who she could trust and who she couldn't, and how she tried to create a larger relationship with the city because she had to. I mean, she had to have some version of when your school's burned to the ground and your orphans are homeless, and you have folks literally in the community taking orphans into their homes and they're living in church basements. You have to figure out, wait, how am I going to create this thing in a way that other people care, and that there's additional fundraising that happens around it. So what's helped me has been the sources. But yeah, no, I'll say personally, it's kind of frustrating that I couldn't just, dial her up and talk to her. Let her children speak for her.
Yeah. Wow. Any last comments or questions?
I just want to say thank you all. I appreciate it. I literally almost wrote a usable path ? On the end when I saw how big the numbers were for registering versus the exclamation point. But I'm excited that we just got to talk about this. And so I thank you for the invitation. Thank you so much, Shantae, for this opportunity, as well as Nancy. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia. So, Shantae, you're muted. I know it's endemic to the platform.
Oh, now you're
still muted. Yep.
Now I'm unmuted.
There you go.
Sylvia, I wish you great success in your work with MPS, and I know that we shall see each other again. So thank you so much. Nancy, hats off to you, lady. Hats off to you. And I hope everybody go on Facebook and check out some of our virtual programming that we're doing with our partners. This is cataclysmic to me. I love people. I like being around everybody, and so I'm so heartbroken. But we have a phenomenal group of people that are doing online and virtual tours. So all of you out there, please support our museums and check out their programs, because your unique visits will be proof that people care and that your museum matters. And they'll be watching those numbers. So please go out there, see a virtual tour, enjoy Baltimore and other places as well. There's lots of people across the country that are doing virtual programming. So I suggest that all of us, support our museums and our historic sites, because those places matter. And I'm wishing everyone to be safe and be well. And I'll see you when I see you.
Thank you again, Shantae, for your brilliant programming for this whole series of It's More Than History Talks. You mentioned virtual tours. If anybody wants to take a recorded virtual tour of the Peel, I've posted a link here in the chat panel. We will be offering further live virtual tours of the Peel. And one point of the Peel history that actually intersects with your talk, Sylvea, is the Peel was from 1878 to 1889, male and female colored school number 1. It was the site of one of the very first public schools in the state of Maryland, and the first one in Baltimore to offer a secondary school education to people of color. So it's this intersection, the role of education, the role of schools, and of course the visionary people, which in Baltimore included people like Isaac Myers and the Brotherhood of Liberty, who campaigned for the right for Black teachers to teach Black students, is really a critical part of this. And we see the legacy, good and bad, in the school system today, and the racism and the segregation that persists, and the struggle against that has continued as well. So feel free to visit that link to take a tour of the Peel. You'll hear a little bit about that history. If you visit our YouTube page, the Peel's YouTube page, we might be able to get that link up here quickly. You can also take what we call a ghost tour of the Peel as male and female colored school number 1. So enjoy that, and we'd love to hear from anybody else who is doing research or wants to learn more on this topic. So thank you again, everybody.
Share just one thing. I'm sorry. I had it in my notes. I want to say that a lot of my rethinking, when you said the school thing, around Tuggle has been critically. Dr. Sandra Loda Jackson wrote a book about educators and the early legacies of the civil rights movement in Birmingham. And I really want to say that the way that she wrote about that text has really helped me think a broader way about Tuggle. And so Dr. Sandra Loda Jackson's work has very much helped to inform the way that I thought about this.
Okay, fantastic. All right, and I'm just pasting here in the chat as well. Oh, thank you. Heather Shelton has pasted the YouTube link to the ghost tour of the Peel as male and female colored school number 1. All right, with that, we'll let everybody go. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time around.
Take care.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.